It was as if the sea had forgotten even its own ancient voice that morning. Its whispers had stopped. The eternal rhythm of its waves had been disturbed. The sky spread from horizon to horizon like a leaden blanket, too heavy to suppress the smell of seaweed. Even the waves hitting the shore seemed to be crushed under the weight of 1,000 years of shame, as if they were afraid to meet the sand. And in the center of all this tranquility, at the oldest and sharpest end of the ancient cliffs, surrounded by the damp smell of seaweed, she sat, Melania. It was as if the eternal balance she had established between water and wind for 1,000 years had been shaken from its roots for the first time. She had stopped, but her stance was neither the watchful waiting of a hunter nor the indifferent throne posture of a deity. His gaze was fixed not on the endless blue of the sky, but on the dark and cold waters of the deep. And strangest of all, her voice was absent. Melania no longer spoke. Her lips seemed sealed with an invisible oath, never to be opened again. In the depths lay the cold, shattered body of that day's prey. It was the skeleton of a ship. As if tired of its own grief, it was slowly sinking, being crushed in the cruel embrace of the water, breaking into 1,000 pieces. Those magnificent masts, built with the labor and hopes of thousands of people, were broken one by one, and the proudly unfurled sails were ripped away by the cold, indifferent hands of the sea. Life had been sucked out of it. All that remained was a bitter breath born from the mixture of salt and the smell of damp wood, and the metallic odor of blood, which was more intense than anything else. He had sunk that ship, just as he had done countless times, maybe tens, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of times throughout the ages. That glorious, unique song that mesmerized human souls and lured them to death. Every word was a hymn, every note a death warrant. It deceived people, dragged them to unknown shores, and finally brought them death with fear. That song was the ancient law of the Sirens, the most basic, the most primitive part of their nature. And she had fulfilled this law with every breath, with every cascading note. But this time, a wind of change blew from the deepest depths of the seas. She felt something tearing inside her. It was not her voice, but that primal, unquenchable desire, that insatiable, blood-fueled hunger of the Sirens. Melania thought for the first time that she never wanted to sing that song again. This thought, though it spread like a whisper, was more than a betrayal of her own kind. It was a defiance of her own nature, of the ancient laws to which she had been bound for millennia. As he closed his eyes, a whisper rose from the quietest, most farthest corner of his heart. It was neither the seductive melody of a siren nor the hum of a death spell. It was ordinary, naked, shameful, and most importantly, a word that was entirely human. Enough. When that single word slipped from the rock and touched the water, the sea shuddered. Trembling rings formed on its surface, and even the deepest currents paused for a moment. All the thousands of words ever uttered by a siren up to that moment had never been as effective as that single, ordinary word. The wind stopped. The silence sharpened, hung in the air. In that moment, the world heard that one word. The great gods in the heavens would not have heard it. They were only interested in great prophecies and cosmic games. But the sea, with every drop, with every current, realized that Melania no longer wanted to take life, that she had given up her predatory nature. Yet there were seaweeds that grew with her voice, currents that danced with her song. Even though she no longer spoke, The sea carried her to its deepest depths like an echo that could not be silenced. Melania's change was engraved in the sea's memory like an embroidery. Slowly, almost reluctantly, it slid into the water from the edge of the rock. This dive was neither the beginning of a hunt nor the end of a game. It was the first step of an ancient being into the unknown. The salty waters, recognizing his body, accepted him as they always did. However, this acceptance was not friendly, but skeptical. The sea may not have had eyes, but it had 1,000 years of memory. And Melania's eyes had changed more than anything else. There was no longer the old wild hunger in his eyes, no longer the sparkle of that hunting spirit. In its place, regret had taken its place, silent, permanent, and never to be erased. This regret was a brand new, alien feeling for a siren. It pulled at her soul like a vortex. As he was turning around the wreckage, among the ruins, he saw something small and flickering. At first, he thought his eyes had deceived him. Perhaps it was the reflection of water. But then he realized, a small moving piece. No, it was not just a piece of wood. There was a small body clinging to it, pale with fatigue. It was still breathing. It was a child. He couldn't have been more than 8, maybe 9. He was facing the water, but his life was not yet gone. He had not heard Melania's fatal song because he had either fallen asleep or the sound had been lost in the noise of the waves. And this only kept him alive.
A fear passed through Melania. For the first time in centuries, perhaps even ages, she was shaken by such an intense feeling. Her instincts told her to pull this little person into the depths like the others. But that wild instinct, that one word, that enough, was buried in a deep pit, never to return. Melania wanted to save that child. But how? Because his own voice could kill him. Even the slightest echo of a siren's song could drown a person. It was a divine law, an inevitable part of his nature. He approached the boy, but closed his lips tightly. He swallowed his voice. The millennia-old melodies knotted in his throat, trapped deep inside, without missing a single word. He only held out his hands. He gently grasped the small, lifeless-looking hands that clutched the wood tightly. With a tenderness he had never known, he carried her up from the dangerous currents at the bottom to calmer waters. This silent endeavor was far more difficult than the hunts of centuries. Every muscle, every wing felt the weight of this unfamiliar act, and all the while he sang no song. The sea was silent. It was watching what was happening, witnessing this extraordinary moment with every drop. Melania was no longer an ordinary part of the sea, but a brand new being that defied its ancient laws, a siren that broke the laws and rebelled against its own nature. When he reached the shore, he left the boy in the moss-covered ruins of an ancient temple, forgotten by erosion and time. The stones whispered the name of Poseidon, once majestic and powerful, but the temple was now a forgotten monument, abandoned by the gods. Its ruined columns stood like ghosts in the salty wind of the sea. The melted statues reminded of faceless gods. Melania gently stroked the child's wet, salty hair with her hands. The child was not asleep, but neither was he awake, as if he was on the verge of waking and dreaming, somewhere between two worlds. His small, shivering body was shriveled by the cold, but Melania's touch was like a moment of warmth, a consolation. She felt as if a siren had touched her, but she could not believe in this gentle, protective touch as much as she believed in the gods. Melania repeated that word, that promise, one more time inside her. This time not only for herself, but as if she wanted the ancient stones, the sea, and the heavens to hear it. Enough. Never again. He would never use his voice to sink a soul. The gods of the sea may not have heard it. Their ears were open only to the clangor of great battles and the universal code. But far, far away, in the deepest, darkest, and most ancient depths of the sea, a resounding wave of sound spread, and with that oath, someone began to awaken. The old sirens, sitting on the icy thrones of the Council of Sirens, ruling through the ages with eyes that saw no light, were startled by this strange echo. Their eyes sensed danger awakening in the deepest, darkest places of the sea. A siren had broken the 1,000-year-old law. Melania had whispered her oath to the sea, and that oath had broken the shells of a law that slept for 1,000 years. Shaken in ancient balance, the gates of the unknown were opening.
The Sea of Sirens always begins with an echo. Even the faintest whisper hits the shores, and the sea is like memory. It forgets nothing. An event once imprinted in its soul continues to echo even in the darkest corners of the deepest caves, until its whisper is heard thousands of years later. When the child was left on the sandy shore, silence still reigned. It was not an ordinary silence, with neither the birds singing nor the wind howling. It was a moment when nature watched with curiosity and timid reverence the storm inside Melania. Melania was kneeling at the child's bedside, her body feeling the cold of the ancient stones covered with moss. She touched the child's forehead with her hands, turning his face slightly to let the sun shine on it. His skin was cold and pale, like a newborn moon, but not dead. His chest rose and fell in a deep but irregular rhythm like the tide of the sea. It was as if a spirit stood at the threshold of the body, uncertain whether to return again or not. For the first time in hundreds of years, Melania felt hope. And immediately afterwards, a fear, brought on by this new and foreign feeling, spread to the deepest layers of her soul. Because sirens did not hope. They did not wait. Their presence was a combination of the sea and death. Their songs of joy and sorrow were only part of a game, never of an expectation. But now, Melania was waiting. For hours. Without a sound, she simply sat by that tired body. It was as if this child was not the first soul she had sunk, but a buried part of her old self, her innocent and hopeful side, and she was waiting for it to wake up again. The sun had climbed to the highest point of the sky, its light burning the sandy shores. And at that moment,
the closed eyelids of that little body flickered open. Melania's eyes widened in millennial wonder. She did not sing. She did not ask his name. She did not recoil in fear. She was just there, standing silently among those ancient cliffs, as if witnessing the beginning of a fairy tale. I don't know what the boy felt when he first saw it. Maybe he saw only a shadow reflected by the sea. Maybe he thought he was dreaming. But then his eyes met Melania's sea-colored, deep and wise eyes. In that encounter, no scream was heard, because Melania did not use her voice, even at that moment. If she had, that voice would have been a spell. If it had been magic, the boy would no longer be a boy. He would have become a ghost, a curse, a legend. But now there were only two beings. One saved from drowning, the other saved from his song. The boy wanted to say something. His lips were dry, tremblingly parted, but no sound came out. Perhaps he was still in shock. Perhaps the salts of the sea had settled in his throat. Melania, as if realizing this, reached out her hand, touched his lip lightly, and shook her head from side to side. "Don't talk," she said with her eyes. "Not yet." Strangely, the boy understood this silent command. Perhaps not the meaning of the words, but the feeling and intention behind them. For the first time, Melania had used not words to speak to him, but her presence. The ancient and magical presence of those sirens. It was for a siren to give up her own identity, to deny her most basic nature. But the silence did not last long. From far away, deeper in the sea, a vibration traveled through the undersea rocks and struck the old walls. The stones trembled as if shaken by the wrath of Poseidon. A thin line emerged from the water, at first like a whisper, then growing into a crack. The air was heavy with the salt of the sea and the subtle echo of a distant melody. Melania stood up immediately. The language of the waves had changed. This was not ordinary sound of the wind, no storm, but a familiar call rising from the deepest depths of the seabed. This was the coming of the called. So one of the sirens had found him. It was one of her old sisters with whom she had once sung, sunk, and sworn an oath. Her name was Thalea. Thalea moved through the sea like a shadow, like a current. She came filtering through the deepest and coldest layers of the ocean, and her presence was so intense that it made every drop of the sea shiver. Thalea was smiling like a human being as she glided through the sea foam. But that smile was not in her eyes. Her eyes carried the coldness, eternity, and hunting spirit of the deepest depths of the sea. That smile was just a mask stuck on his lips, a mask he had used for hundreds of years to deceive people. As soon as Melania sensed his presence, she instinctively moved in front of him. The law of the sirens forbade protecting a soul, especially a human soul. It was the most sacred of laws. The Leia didn't speak. Sirens did not speak at the first encounter. To speak was to begin the hunt, the first step in a game that began not with words, but with looks and vibrations. The Leia swam slowly closer, her wings rippling in the water, changing the flow of the sea with each movement. Melania did not retreat. Their bodies stood like statues, keeping an invisible distance between them. Two ancient beings, two brothers who once carried the notes of the same song, now faced each other because of an oath and the child. They looked into each other's eyes. In Melania's eyes, there was the weight of a newly awakened regret and an unwavering determination. The Leia's eyes held 1,000 years of anger and the coldness of a betrayed soul. The water stood trembling around the two women, as if the sea was waiting for the outcome of this encounter. And at last, the Leia let the words fall into the sea, her voice echoing like a scream under the water. "Why didn't you sink her?" Melania didn't answer. This non-answer was the greatest insult, the greatest challenge for a siren. Melania's silence was an invitation to war. The Leia took a step closer. The smile was gone from her face. Now there was just pure and primitive anger. "Are you no longer among us?" she asked. This implied the most severe punishment for a siren: ostracized, exile. Melania lowered her eyes, but it was not a surrender. She hesitated for a moment and then did something unexpected. Without making a sound, she slowly lowered her head. A siren wouldn't do that. It wouldn't bow. A siren could only stand like that in front of its prey. But this was not surrender. It was the result of an internal prohibition that defied 1,000 years of siren law. It was a decision. The Leia tilted her head to the side, her face showing surprise for a moment. Then it turned into bitter laughter. Her voice echoed in every corner of the sea. This laughter carried the pain and anger of a lost brother rather than victory. If you think the gods have not heard this, you are mistaken. They hear the deepest echoes of our existence. Not only you, but we all are burned now, he said. The sea swallowed that laughter, but silence followed again. Because the Leia didn't turn away. She did not melt into the water. She remained as she had come, like a cloud that hangs in the sky even after the most violent moment of a storm. A distance collapsed between them. This distance was now not only a physical, but also a spiritual abyss. Melania checked the boy behind her again. He was asleep. Maybe he was just pretending. Maybe he had taken refuge in a dream beyond the reach of the sirens. But one thing was certain now. The sirens had learned. At that moment when Melania was silent, other sirens in the depth of the ocean, in distant lands, began to sing their songs louder as if they wanted to balance this silence. Melania's silence was a rebellion, and this rebellion had alarmed the entire world of sirens. The sea did not accept Melania's oath, because no matter how silent a siren was, the sea would never forget its inner voice, the echo of that 1,000-year-old song. And now, that echo, like a storm warning, was ringing in the ears of Melania's former brothers.
The waters had not risen, but it had become strangely heavy, as if a sorrow had been placed on the back of a giant. Melania knew the sea, knew the meaning of each tide, each foam, each whisper. For hundreds of years, she had heard the breath of the ocean, lived with it. In that breath now, like an aged wine, there was a deep and hidden anger. It was a wave of wrath that did not ripple on the surface, but crashed against the rocks in the deepest depths. In Melania's presence, the sea now felt only an echo, an emptiness, instead of the joyful song in which it had once grown. It was like the silence of a mother when she cannot hear her child's voice, and this silence deeply disturbed the sea. For the first time in years, the water itself did not echo around him. It was as if the sea, instead of answering her with its own voice, refused to take her in. Melania could feel this new and cold distance between her and the sea. It was no longer Melania's own silence. It was a dangerous silence that surrounded her, a silence that had become an adjective of nature itself. This was the ancient silence that silenced the storm before the storm, that forced the whole world to hold its breath. This silence had stopped the mystical currents that fed the power of the siren songs, had frozen the heart of the sea. The boy was still asleep, but his face had changed. His pale skin was now slightly colored, and his cheeks were warm. His hands began to tremble unconsciously in the direction of the wind. Perhaps she had just come out of the nightmares of the sea and was entering a new dream. Perhaps she heard not the sound of the sea, but the rhythm of a mother's heart. Melania put a smooth and round stone she found among the seaweed on his head. This stone was neither an ordinary stone nor an ornament. It was an ancient vow of protection among the sirens, a vow used only in the most sacred moments for the deepest bonds. When the stone touched the child's skin, it emitted a faint glow, as if the soul of the sea had been sealed with this oath. But Melania knew that even this stone was not enough to save her. It was only a symbolic gesture, not a shield, only a prayer. Because now, not only she, but also that child had become the target of the sea. The sea would not only punish Melania, the soul who violated this law, who refused the sacred duty of the sirens to sink, but also destroy the soul she protected. In the sea, this law was the most sacred, and no one could break it. It was the cornerstone of the existence of all sirens. A thin, almost inaudible sound rose in the distance. It was not a siren song. It did not have the sweet, deadly magic of those songs. It was more like a call, a whisper, the wind's own whisper. Melania recognized this voice. It was not the voice of a siren, but of a goddess. It was the voice of Thalassa, the first mother of the sea, the creator of all waters. For Melania, it was an invitation. It was a call of the goddess calling her son to her side, the son who had broken his vow. Melania entered the water without hesitation.
With calm steps, she moved towards a dark and bottomless depth. The waves surrounding her body recognized her, but now retreated, as they had once welcomed her with respect. They knew him, but they no longer trusted him. The taste of salt was sharper, the coldness of the water more burning. This cold was not just the temperature of the water, but a spiritual cold that came from the rejection of Thalassa, the mother goddess. With every drop of this coldness, Melania felt her 1,000 years of loyalty being shaken. As she swam towards the sunken temples, the eyes of the statues lying under the water seemed to be watching Melania. These temples were once sacred places dedicated to Thalassa, where all sea creatures prayed. Though now abandoned and covered with algae, the sacredness was still in the stones. Their spirits could be felt in the tide of the sea. Melania stood in front of a statue with closed eyes. The statue represented a goddess lying in an eternal sleep in the depths of the sea. As her hands rested on the surface of the stone, she felt the coldness of 1,000 years of history. The stone was wet, but not from centuries of age, because time had stopped here.
Melania's lips did not move, but she spoke from within, from the depths of her soul. If you hear me, Thalassa, I have never denied you. I have never denied your laws, the power of your presence, the sanctity of the seas. But I no longer want what you want. I am still your child, but this time I protect another child, a human being, not to break vows, but to keep them. The water rippled strangely around Melania, but there was no answer. Goddesses did not speak. Their answers were the whisper of the sea, the vibration of the rocks, the color of the sky. Melania bowed her head. Then she closed her eyes. She was not praying because she knew that prayers would be useless, nor did she surrender because her journey was far beyond surrender. She only understood now. Goddesses did not answer, they only signaled. And at that very moment, the sign came. Not a sound behind her, but a vibration. A slow and patient wave rose up to Melania's shoulder. When Melania turned round, she saw a silhouette emerging from the dark water of the sea. It was not a siren, not a human being, but the ghost of a goddess. She had no eyes, but it was as if she was looking at her with all the wisdom of the sea. Her hands did not reach out, but touched. Her presence reached the deepest part of Melania's soul. She did not speak, but she made herself heard. Her voice came not with words, but with an echo that penetrated the mind. Every siren is born with a song. Every song feeds on his soul. If the soul is not given, the song becomes blasphemy. Melania withdrew. It wasn't a threat. It was like a law of nature, the basic rule of the siren's existence. If she saved this child, her own voice would no longer be a song but a curse that would devour her essence, her very being. It was not a choice, it was a price.
but he had already made his choice. He turned round and surfaced. The boy was still there, asleep, but on his face, despite all the storms of the ocean, there was a strange smile. He felt safe, as if he had escaped the nightmares for a moment. Melania sat next to him. Her eyes traveled beyond the sea, beyond the stones, rocks, and cliffs, and the sentence that passed through her sealed her own fate, whispered her own vow to the sea. I will no longer sing, and so perhaps I will no longer exist. But this child will be the first voice to survive the song, and not even the sea will be able to overpower his voice. And just then, from far away, a familiar tune was heard. It was a siren song, soaring, aching, but at the same time powerful, full of rage. Pelaya had begun. She was announcing Melania's decision to all the sisters of the sea. This was no longer a battle of silence. This was the first rebellion against Melania's oath, which the song opened to the whole world.
The wind had changed direction. The seaweed on the shore had abandoned its gentle undulations, which had always leaned towards the sea, and was now swaying northwards, towards distant lands. This small change was just a movement of air for ordinary mortal eyes. Perhaps it was the last echo of the silence before a storm. But Melania knew. This was not a weather phenomenon, but a sign. The spirit of the sea had whispered her silence, her rebellion to all sea creatures. Every siren, every seaweed, every grain of sand living in the sea was aware of her presence. The sirens and the depths had now memorized his direction. The north wind was the cold breath of their anger. It was a warning to Melania that wherever she ran, they would find her there. But this thought did not create fear in him. His centuries of loneliness had surrounded him like a shield against every danger. He no longer lived with the endless sorrow of the sea, but with a brand new feeling. He was no longer a prey escaping from the cruel laws of the ocean, but a warrior sworn to protect. Because, for the first time, he had found a refuge even from himself, that boy. Despite his silence, his rejection, his curse, the child was the only reality for him at that moment. The boy opened his eyes again, this time, not from sleep, but from curiosity. His eyes still bore the traces of fatigue and nightmares of the sea, but there was meaning in them now. For the first time in his life, he perceived the world around him as a reality, not a dream. His gaze traveled around. Stones, seaweed, the decaying remains of a sailboat in the distance. Everything was foreign to her, but it looked like something she had known for a very long time. And then he saw Melania. She was sitting on the rock. She didn't seem interested in him, but she was, with all her senses. Melania could feel even the smallest crackle of a ship she once hunted in the deepest darkness. Now all her senses were focused on every breath, every heartbeat, every movement of this little boy. Because the child was awake, and this was now a time of communication without song. The boy took a few steps first, unsteadily.
He had not yet recovered fully. The ebb and flow of the waves crashing on the shore and returning left a shiver on his small body. Melania turned round, looked into his eyes, but said nothing. It was as if the child knew that all the voices, all the songs he had heard all his life were over. He was waiting for something, a sound, a word, a name, something. But no sound came from Melania. Melania only put her hand on the place where the hearts of the sirens beat. She knew that there, once upon a time, all the songs of the sea beat with fervor. That song was now replaced by the quiet rhythm of this little heart she had sworn to protect. Then she extended her hand to the boy in a gesture of sworn protection. She didn't ask his name, because sirens did not ask for names. Names are a call, and a call is a destiny. Melania didn't want to give that child a destiny. She just wanted to give him a choice. The boy approached him. He was not afraid. Maybe he should have been. It was a siren, once the nightmare of all sailors, a being who knew the deepest secrets of the ocean. But no, in Melania's eyes, for the first time, he saw something he had never seen in his life. A warmth from the silence. It was a warmth that didn't freeze even in the icy waters of the sea. A motherly warmth that enveloped everything. In this warmth, the boy was filling the void created by his own lostness, the coldness of the sea, and the absence of his family.
He sat down next to Melania without saying a word. Time seemed to stretch at that moment. Not minutes, maybe hours passed. Nothing was heard except the sound of the waves, the whisper of the wind. But it was understood without being spoken. This silence was worth 1,000 words. Melania drew lines on the ground, on the sand with a mossy stone. The first line represented a wave. The second represented a ship sinking on that wave. The third represented a small figure next to that sinking ship. The child looked. He understood. With his little hands, he drew other figures next to the same drawings. A house, a woman, and a sun. A small figure he drew next to Melania. That's when Melania sighed. It was a pain the sea heard. It wasn't just a pain, it was the echo of a voice that broke the vow of the sirens. Because the boy said he had a family, a home, a mother, maybe a sister, but now he could see none of them. And then the sea heard that sigh. The sky turned gray on the horizon. The sky understood the sea's pain, but it did not forgive. Because this pain was the result of Melania's defiance of the law of the sea. Melania draped over the boy's shoulders a piece of cloth from a sinking ship, soaked and hardened with salt. He was shivering. He knelt again, and for the first time, very faintly, she moved her lips. No, it wasn't a song. It wasn't even a melody. It was just a voice carrying the echo of the wind. You're not home.
but you're here now." The boy didn't understand, but his eyes felt something. A small smile appeared on his lips. He didn't understand, but he felt it. Just then, one of the stones moved. The ground shook slightly, then more violently. One of the collapsed pillars of the temple was separated by a deep crack. Melania was startled. This tremor was not natural. It heralded the awakening of a sleeping being in the deepest depths of earth, sea, and heavens. This was the step of a summoned being, not sirens. This was a goddess. But she was still not awake. She had only stirred. A forgotten goddess at the bottom of the sea. Perhaps the shadow of the Lhasa. Perhaps the rage of Nereus. No one knew her name anymore. But now she had heard Melania's silence, and she considered her silence an insult to the ancient laws of the sea. Melania, terrified by the shock, closed the boy's eyes, as if to put him to sleep. But this time it was not for sleep, but for protection. Because now, not only humans heard the siren at night, but gods too. And a god was watching a siren. This silent rage from the depths of the sea now threatened not Melania's fate, but the fate of the whole world.
The sea of the night is different from that of the day. At night, the water is deeper, the salt heavier, the darkness more honest. When the light of the sun recedes, all the secrets of the ocean appear in the foam of the waves that break the surface. Melania recognized this honesty because she had spent thousands of years of her existence in it. For years, she hunted at night. It was the bottomless darkness itself. Every whisper of the sea, every undercurrent, the vibration of the seaweed on every stone was a familiar story to her. But now the night was an interrogator bent over him. He was sitting quietly on the shore with the boy lying on the sand. The moonlight did not touch where Melania was, as if the water was pushing her back. It was a painful demonstration of the sea's first rejection of its connection with her as a siren. The sky was looking up, but it was not warming. The stars in the sky had once witnessed the highest notes of Melania's song, and now they knew that it had fallen silence. This silence was disturbing even the heavens. Melania did not lift her gaze to the heavens, for there was judgment, and she was now facing the cruel judgment not only of the gods, but also of her own conscience. The boy turned his head. His face was still pale, his skin parched from the salt and cold of the sea, but his eyes were fixed on Melania's. These eyes had just awakened from the fog of a dream, but they were deep and mature enough to see 1,000 years of sorrow. The boy saw the bottomless emptiness in Melania's eyes, an emptiness brought by hunting, sculpted by loneliness, and now filled by compassion. Then he opened his mouth and said her first word. Broken, cracked, with a voice crushed by thousands of shells and seaweed, but in a whisper that carried meaning. "Are you a dream?" This simple question was enough to shake Melania's entire existence.
For thousands of years, she and her kind were but a dream for humans. A dream, a myth, a ghost. But now a child had seen through her mask and questioned the truth. Melania closed her eyes. She didn't answer. For her, the answers were not in words, but in behavior. Words were a trap for sirens. The song was a weapon, and she didn't want to use it anymore. But the boy was waiting. Time seemed to stop. Even the sound of the waves ceased. And this moment revealed another truth for Melania. Silence was no longer an answer. Melania had to break the silence. She approached the boy. She reached for a small stone on the sand. It was a hardened boulder, beaten and rolled by the sea. And on the sand she drew it carefully, a mark, an eye. Then she touched his own chest where his heart beat. She thought of how that heart had once beaten with the currents of the sea, how it now moved with the breath of a child. Then she touched the stone again, and finally she bowed her head slightly with a deep meaning. It was a wordless oath typical of sirens. It meant, the I is real. I am with you. I am real. The boy nodded. He understood, or wanted to understand, Melania's silent vow. It had become a hope for him, a refuge. At that moment, the waters changed again. Near the shore, the stones cracked slightly, but this time it was not a goddess awakening, but a memory. A memory that had been sleeping under the sea for centuries. A memory that began with Melania's first breath, her first song. A forgotten siren's nest at the bottom of the ocean was being revived. Melania stood up. She touched the boy before looking deeper into the water. She told him not to go away, wordlessly, and she went into the water. The water was no longer warm, but it wasn't scary either. It was just unfamiliar. As Melania felt the weight of this new feeling inside her, the water seemed foreign to her. It was as if the water was apologizing to her old friend. She didn't recognize him anymore.
Melania swam. She swam past shipwrecks, through seaweed. She glided past faceless statues, ruined marble palaces from the time of the sirens. And she reached an old place. This was the place where she was born, under the rock where she sang her first song as a siren. The stones around the rock were old and tired, just like her. There, among the stones, was a small statue, eyes closed, mouth open. The mouth of that statue was the hollow that once reflected his song, and now it was silent. Melania bent down. She put her hand on the statue. She remembered that first day when she had once defied nature. The first ship, the first smell, the first scream. That sweet and terrible moment when a song ended a life. He remembered how simple and cruel everything had been. But now, that song was silent, and the statue was not responding. Salt poured from Melania's eyes. It wasn't water, not the salt of the sea. It was the oozing of an inner heaviness. Sirens don't cry. When they cried, there was more than just salt water in their eyes. A pain, a regret,
that the sea couldn't swallow. He felt movement behind him, a slight agitation. Even before he turned, he knew Philea had come. But this time, she was not alone. There were two other voices with her, the old sirens, Athea and Lysidra. All three were watching her. There were no words, no song, only eyes and the past. In the eyes, the accumulated anger of thousands of years, the pain of betrayal, and the bewilderment of a rebellion against the siren laws. Philea was the wisest of the three. Instead of anger, her face showed deep sorrow. "What are you trying to do?" she whispered. Her voice had the sadness of the seaweed in the deepest part of the sea. Melania did not answer. She bent down and put a stone on the statue. It was a sign among the sirens to seal the past. It was an act that showed that she was now closing the door to her old self, to her old oaths. This seal not only closed the mouth of the statue, but also sealed the siren identity in Melania's heart. Athea growled. She was the fiercest and most powerful siren. Her voice rumbled like a volcano under the sea. "Are you giving up everything because of this child? Thousands of years? Your own essence? The song? Us?" Her eyes flashed with a dangerous gleam to dissuade Melania. "Is it befitting a siren like you to break your vow for the sake of a mortal?" Melania looked up. She locked eyes for the first time. She saw her own reflection in the eyes of all three. The anger, fear, and disappointment in their eyes were feelings she had once carried within herself. And she opened her mouth. No, it wasn't a song. No, it wasn't melodic, but it was clear and perfectly intelligible. "Not you. I let go of myself." It was a whisper, but it was an earthquake. The anger on Athea's face turned to astonishment. Lysidra's sharp expression softened. In the eyes of Philea, the fatigue of thousands of years and a deep pity for this inevitable end appeared. Silence fell, because it was a siren's decision never to return. And when this decision echoed under the water, the sea darkened slightly. A whisper spread from the bottom to the surface, a sound that only sirens could hear. "The sea will not swallow the betrayer, but it will no longer carry him." This was the sea's final judgment. It was a sentence that cut Melania's existence, her connection with the sea. Melania understood. She was no longer made of water, but of her own steps. She knew the water wouldn't protect her, but there was still the child, and that child had survived the song. Whatever the cost, it was worth it.
The sea was deeper tonight, dark as pitch. Neither the depths of the water nor the depths of the sky were separated from each other. Both enveloped the earth like a shroud of an ancient mourning. The sky hid its stars, and only the pale, flickering light of the moon, like a lantern, traced a shimmering, broken path over the waves. On the wind was the whisper of an
ancient lament from distant, forgotten times. It echoed throughout the world, condemning the eternal silence that began when Melania broke her vow. A silence that even Nereus did not want to hear. Melania stood with the child among the barren ruins of the destroyed temple. The rage of the Sirens had not only raised the surface of the sea, but had also awakened the mighty spirits in the deepest depths of the earth. This rage, combined with the awakening of the old goddess, now stood before them as a tangible threat. From beneath the dark waters rose a power that had once molded all seas and coasts with its mighty hand. This was no goddess of the sea. This was the forgotten and remembered Holy Spirit of the sea itself. It was the ancient being that once symbolized and punished injustice that mortals, sailors, and even gods thought could not be judged. She was Neredia, the forgotten protector of the sea, born of the spirit of the first ocean, the embodiment of law and vengeance. Her presence made even the air above the shore heavy. Each wave sounded like a blow of judgment. Neredia's eyes were like two stars shooting out to the deepest, coldest darkness of the sea. And her voice, instead of echoing in the water, rose as if the water itself were speaking. Melania, you have silenced your song and protected man. This is a betrayal of the spirit of all sea creatures and the great sea. The existence of an oath breaker is spreading like a plague in these lands and these waters. But the sea never forgives those who break its rules. And now, without a doubt, you will pay the price. Your end will be nothing but nothingness.
For a moment, Nereide's words recreated everything Melania had experienced in her past, every song, every scream. But Melania did not tremble. There was neither fear nor regret on her face, because she knew that sacrifices were an integral part of any path, especially the path of freedom. She squeezed the boy's small, trembling hand, giving him not only physical support, but also spiritual strength. I chose this price, Melania said, her voice a whisper of determination against Nereide's mighty echo. Because silence is sometimes the loudest song. For me, the life of this child is more precious than all the songs of the sea. I am now singing this silence. At that moment, the boy opened his eyes. There was no surprise in his gaze. On the contrary, there was a wisdom that defied the weight of thousands of years. In contrast to Nereide's voice, the boy spoke
and his own small but firm voice. His name was a simple human name, but in that moment, it echoed like the whisper of a prophecy. My name is Thanos, and this world will be my home. This simple sentence was enough to shake even Nereid's might for a moment. The forgotten protector of the sea surged with rage. The waters began to pound the shore. Giant waves tossed the ruins of the ruined temple like a toy. The storm erupted, the sky shattered, but Melania fought bravely, defending Thanos, holding fast to her oath. This was not a fight, but a battle of wills. It was a clash of ancient laws, love, and a new hope between a siren, a goddess, and a child. Melania fought against the sea, the gods, and her own destiny. It was a challenge of individual courage to a universal force. And finally, Nereid's fury slowly faded in the face of this stubborn resistance. The sea surged with Nereid's voice, but was calmed by Melania's determination. With a final roar, Nereid's presence merged with the sea and fell silent. Melania's silence was now the silence of the sea. At that moment, while the whole world held its breath, the sea broke its silence. A song arose, but it was not the song of a siren or a god. It was the song of freedom, life, and hope. Beyond all sirens, gods, and storms. It was a song that began with Melania's silence and ended with Thanos' name. Melania and Thanos looked at the shore. The storm was over. The sea was calm. A new day was dawning on the horizon. The first rays of light were carving a new path on the surface of the sea, over the waters where Nereid had once ruled, and Melania knew that this silence was no longer frightening, but sacred.